and welcome to Artha Lab, a podcast dedicated to conversations on visual culture. Today we have with us Akansha Rastogi. She is Senior Curator of Exhibitions and Programming at the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art, New Delhi. This year, the KNMA turns 10, which makes it old enough to cross the road by itself. Sorry, that's a really bad joke. But it does turn 10, which is a milestone. Akansha and I are going to talk about a decade of institutional programming, her own curatorial practice within the museum space, and of course, the stakes and possibilities of the museum as a political and social site in 2020, against the backdrop of movements for racial and caste justice, and, you guessed it, the COVID-19 crisis. Welcome to the show, Akansha. It's great to have you with us. Thanks for agreeing to come on.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Kamini, for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. I think our listeners will learn a lot hearing you. Before we continue, I'd like to let our listeners know how to access the visual material accompanying our conversation. To view the images being discussed in the episode, click on the link in the show notes to download the guide. You can also download the image guide for each episode from our Twitter and Instagram pages. So, Akansha, you've been with the museum almost from its inception. From 2011. Is that right?
Yes, I joined in 2011.
2011, right. So I'm going to begin by asking you to talk a bit about your own professional journey within the space. I know you studied literature as an undergrad. What made you turn to art history and then attract you to the museum as a place to develop your career?
So, as you said, I studied art history. And I was very lucky that right after my master's, which I did at the National Museum Institute, which offers masters in museology, as well as conservation and history of art. So it was an amazing space of learning, not in terms of modern contemporary art, which became my specialization and the field, but definitely a very remarkable space in terms of practice of museology and looking at the inner workings of the museum itself. So coming from that frame to jumping into immediately working with very large collections of private collections of modern and contemporary Indian art. I started working with Oceans, Oceanama was the museum that we were all working towards. So it was an aspiring collection of 2 lakh objects, and there were these amazing colleagues working in films, popular culture, and I was handling modern contemporary art from South Asia. So I had access to these large archives, very amazing, unique archives. And one was looking at this panoramic view of art history with not just 100 to 200 artists, but thousands of artists that many people in arts would not be aware of their names also. So many works were there in the collection and were passing through my eyes and hands, and research was happening. And I also worked at DAG Modern, which was formerly called Delhi Art Gallery, which also has a very commendable collection of around 25,000 artworks. And I was involved in the redesigning of their entire inventory and recategorization of that collection, which includes tagging of artworks, searching through and creating that search engine for different kind of searches, and also researching on them. And there I worked on a couple of books, including Chitta Prasad. So moving to Kiran Nadar Museum of Art came in that order and was quite a natural move. But at that point in time, the collection of the museum was very small, and it was still a very young aspirant museum with not a very, very clear focus, but with a very clear collection of 250 works. It was a huge privilege to be part of its inception and its institutional journey right at the beginning, and had that ability and luxury and privilege to figure out, evolve different departments, evolve different aspects of museum making and building.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're right. When you cut your teeth on institutions like the Oceans Collection and the DAG, then it does seem like it prepares you for taking on something like the first major private museum in India. But so I'm also interested in your own scholarly attention towards exhibition making. I know that you have an interest in exhibition histories and practices, and you've been the recipient of an IFA grant in 2014 to study this. Surprisingly, there's not that much work that's been done on the South Asian exhibitionary complex, apart from Saloni Mathur's India by Design. So I would like to ask you, what are some of the main highlights of your research?
I got that grant in 2000. 12. So it was to study exhibition histories of Indian modern contemporary art, not South Asia per se. But given my exposure to these large collections and archives, which are still private, they're not public and not a lot of people have access to those amazing documents and catalogs. So one had a framework in mind, which was to not focus, the way mainstream artistry works is, through just these handful of landmark exhibitions, and with this idea of landmark exhibitions that kind of say that, the artistry is formed and the works exhibited in these exhibitions and by these artists so and so are make the canon. But one was at the same time exposed to this plethora of catalogs and minor histories, which do not make any kind of mention, are not mentioned in these other narratives, large narratives. So one was asking these questions, and one was asking these questions also about these artists and practices that do not necessarily fit into this large narrative. What happens to those? What happens to the questions that are being asked from different kinds of areas? Why are these margins and not the center? And what are these peripheries that are framed? So while asking these questions, one started looking at mapping and documentation as playing a very important role. To say this briefly, I ended up interviewing 60 plus practitioners from different generations and traveling to different parts of the country, Baroda, Chennai, Kolkata, to Bangalore, to Mysore, to very different parts of the country, and be in discussion with really old art critics as well as very young artists, and get from them data as well as their own imaginations and their work experiences and lives, what kind of exhibition making they have seen and changes they've seen. So I'm sitting on this huge archive and documentation again and processing that through different essays, a series of essays, which I'm in the process of writing.
Right. I was just going to ask when we're going to be able to access your research. I imagine some of it obviously comes through in your exhibitions and shorter form writing. But I was wondering if you would compile and publish the seemingly compendious collection of information, stories, anecdotes, critical frameworks that you've managed to cull during your time as a researcher with the IFA. And also, I think what's interesting is that what I'm interested in is to know how this has inflected or informed your curatorial approach within the museum space, because the museum is a fairly traditional exhibitionary model. I'm really interested to know how a curator intervenes and leaves their mark and sort of impresses upon the museum space their own research, or brings it into conversation with the space or the institutional mandate. Just so our audience knows, Akansha has curated 4 shows at the KNMA: Hanger for the Passerby, 2017, What Place is Kitchen, What Place Community, 2018, Smell Assembly, 2019, and Right to Laziness, 2020. Do you want to comment on how your research has contributed to your interventions within the museum?
Before I talk about my role in the museum or ways of working and the way one has interpreted or reflected on the museum, I just want to spend a little time talking about contemporary art museum as such. Because the contemporary art museum as a category or as an entity and as an institutional form or institution also, it doesn't operate from a very secured identity or position of that of an antiquarian museum would. It is different from a science museum or a natural history museum or an antiquarian museum, encyclopedic museums that we often associate museums with, because in those institutions, the questions of time, value, history, and culture are asked and answered in very different way. So in a contemporary art museum, space stands out more because of its recent history, and also because of its dubious relationship with power and capital, and also because its relationship with our current social, economic, political, and also our ecological conditions is not very clear. It's still very vague. Its relationship with our current situations, current time, is still yet to be fully revealed, or is mediated only by the positions taken by the contemporary artist or creative practitioners or theoreticians or cultural theorists, that the Contemporary Art Museum chooses to, or agencies that Contemporary Art Museum, whose voices it relays or amplifies or presents. So the question that what kind of a position, how Contemporary Art Museum looks at itself, sees itself, asserts itself, is still operates in a very unclear zone. So having said that, that puts it in a very exciting position also, in the sense that it could be a vehicle of change in socially and culturally, but it could also be a representation or absorber of a lot of decadence, or reflector of whatever is going on. And also at the same time, a kind of place where new disciplines can take birth, new conversations can happen, where different worldviews which do not find their place elsewhere in the world can happen here. So it is both a kind of a holder, and when I say holder, I mean it in two ways, like of course a container in which you can place art objects and ideas and things, but it is also a placeholder for things that are yet to be fully named, that have not. So in that sense, it is also a placeholder for a lot of abstract things. And that abstraction is very important. And it can stay with that abstraction for a very long time. And for me as a curator, I've always approached this idea of Contemporary Art Museum as a form, and as a very volatile form, very dynamic, which can shape and reshape and remold itself, remorph also itself, according to the ideas and things it contains and it is operating with. So it can appropriate itself and also the things it contains in distinct ways. So in that sense, it is a contemporary art museum is also very para-institutional. At least the way I also approach it. And by para, I mean it can form alliance with, or can be aligned with, or can have more than one position, and can be side by side with other institutional forms also. For instance, a contemporary art museum can be in alignment with antiquarian museums, with judicial systems, with education systems, with ecologically focused NGOs, so it can, with archives and libraries, so it can align itself with other institutional forms. So keeping this sort of a dynamism has been one of the very important challenges and core idea for me, because an institution has this capacity to solidify itself, and to make its own history and its own narrative. But how, as a curator, you keep those liquid, not let it solidify, not let it stabilize, and keep those liquidous, gaseous forms also, or different forms and narratives alive, has been very interesting and important.
Right. From what I'm hearing you say, I think obviously there's this sense of being a facilitator between the possibilities of the contemporary. The Contemporary Art Museum becomes a site for a certain kind of working out of imaginaries, right? And I think the KNMA, and we'll talk about that in a bit, the KNMA's own engagement, for instance, with its neighborhoods, with the locality, with the city, with the people, speak to that. But just to kind of come back to the museum itself, since that is one of the reasons for our conversation. The collection has grown from, as you said, 250 works in 2010 when it opened to 6,000 plus works in 2020. So I guess the most obvious question is, what has been the strategy and approach towards building a collection? Is it like in the movies where, a stern man goes to these auctions around the world and then silently outbids everyone? Is it like that? Please tell me it's like
that. So it's like saying, so the way we have taken and absorbed it and talked and learned about it, it's a museum not as a ready-made space. It's as a ready to be consumed or exposed or shared entity. It's a space that you build slowly, and build not through a building, but you build in several ways. You build it through collection, you build it through conversations, you build it through programs, you build it through exhibitions, you build it by building and connecting with audiences one-to-one and each day. So the day matters a lot in the life of a museum. So, for instance, like you said, we've grown from 250 to 6,000 plus works, and we're still acquiring. Has meant, how does one think about the region about the 200 plus years of history that one again has categorized that this is the area we're going to operate in. It is essentially a South Asian collection, which we do have international artists also, but it's not a collection which is fully representative of international art, and it will not be. So there are certain boundaries that you put in collecting. I mean, there are certain artists who are represented by depth and breadth, in the sense that all their major phases are represented, but then there are also works that are so huge and in scale and in their scope and conceptually and also physically that they pose other kind of challenges. So this is to say that it's been a journey. And here I would like to probably come in again and emphasize the fact that when we started out, we tried looking for different kinds of models of contemporary art museums across the world. And that was also 2010 was also a period when a lot of private museums were coming up in China and other parts of the world also. But in our research and in our ways of working, we didn't find one with which we could reflect, associate with, or also kind of a model that we could simulate as is. So we had to work ourselves in a certain way to figure out our own modalities. So for instance, like to respond to the art ecology in which we are operating. This is still an art scene which is funded largely by the artists themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I actually just want to know, is there any incident that comes to mind in terms of acquiring works that really stands out? Like, like it was difficult to get that work, but we got it in the end.
Yeah, there's so many works with such different stories. So, remember when we had just opened in 2010 and 11, 10 we opened in Noida, and in 11 we opened in Saket, and that's when I joined. And at that point in time, we were making these 1 year long exhibitions. We would make one exhibition that would go on for a year. So, and the collection was also very small. So there were different analogies being or examples being put to us. Like, there was a lot of skepticism within the art audience, within the art fraternity, and also a kind of because it's a private museum, so there are lots of questions being asked. The transition to a museum acquisition process has been a really long and interesting one. So one work that's coming to my mind is, we had acquired, the Shiba Tati's installation, which was exhibited as part of 48 degree Celsius huge public art festival organized by Coach at the Delhi Public. It was a site-specific work of the water diviner, first installed at the Delhi Public Library. So when we acquired that work, and it also won a prize in Singapore, and were to install it in 2013 at the museum, the context and the work completely changes. There were these thousands and thousands of books that we had to acquire also, and now to store them and also to take care of them. So materially, the works have been very challenging, and like even Bhartikir's Elephant, and we came to be known by that work a lot among schools. We came to be known as Hathiwala Museum. Those because of that Bindi work.
But that's kind of nice. Like when you're adopted by people, like everyone knows Hathiwala Museum has this sweet, folksy kind of quality to it. People remember you. That's nice. I mean, this was before the KNMA really came into its own. This was in its early years. Yeah.
Yeah, but most of these works also present like a huge challenge in terms of their storage, also in terms of their conservation. Because very little effort and has been put, or resources have been put into thinking about the mediums and materials used by contemporary artists and preserving them for future. So we have been in dialogue with a lot of conservators on that aspect. I mean, since we acquired these very, very challenging works. And one of the challenging works again is, Ellen Tallur's Unicode, which has traveled the world, and we have loaned. So because our works also travel and are loaned to different museums and international exhibitions and biennales and triennales, so conservation, of course, becomes a very important aspect. And also, this conversation that keeps happening with the artists also regarding assembly of certain works, because and these manuals that need to be put together in order to assemble the certain kinds of installations together. So there are several challenges.
Yeah, it would seem so. I mean, it's also interesting because we often speak of the museum in very lofty terms. But actually, like this, it's a very labor-intensive and administratively challenging job. It's actually not just a day. It seems like there are different scales of time on which the museum seems to operate. You have the daily opening to visitors, but then behind the scenes, you have so much work that often takes long periods of time to put everything together to get all the parts moving. And then the exhibitions themselves often last very long. That's the nature of the museum. But I think I'm also curious to know, like, how does the team make decisions about programming? Like, have there ever been strong disagreements, like, not another one of those guys, you know?
The process has moved and shifted over the years, and as the team also, in terms of exhibition making and programming. A lot is governed by the collection, but is not limited to the collection, which has been absolutely brilliant. But here at the museum, because we have taken collection as a provocation, and are open to loaning works from outside, from different collections, for activating. So collection is more like an activator of sorts of these stories to be told. So, and these archives to be yet to be seen archives to be made public. A lot of understudied artists and art histories to be further researched. So taking that route and that sort of a curatorial process has been very central for us at the museum, and also making of what we are very well now known for, the kind of large-scale exhibitions that we've made possible, and bringing in the public domain the kind of research we have been able to, and the kind of works and artworks we've made publicly visible and accessible to researchers, and as well as to art connoisseurs and to general public. The prompts for programming, of course, comes from the internal curatorial team, where the questions are in which all directions we can move or shift the narrative to. What all accesses we can generate. Like, for instance, Arpita Singh's retrospective happened, and Arpita Singh was part of this amazing group of women artists, which included Madhvi Parekh, Nalini Malani, and Nilima Sheikh, and the conversation between that was happening between them in the 80s. So how to bring to the front all those other minor stories and narratives. I mean, minor only in the sense of the subject at view or focus in the museum, in that particular exhibition, because it was an Arpita Singh retrospective, but that became a vehicle to explore a lot of other areas and associated histories. So for us, we try to
something like a prism, right? Like, the exhibition becomes a kind of prism through which you refract all of this historical and sociological, anthropological material in a way, while keeping the works at the center.
Yes, absolutely. And our outreach and marketing has also grown. And these are also very important aspects of museum making and thinking. How do you communicate a hoarding of an exhibition? How do you communicate?
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a nice touch, right? You turn into the road towards the museum, the South Court, and then you have this huge hoarding that actually points you towards the museum. I mean, I never thought we'd see the day in India when a hoarding about a museum would be a front and center on a public road, on the main road. So that's quite a nice touch. But you're right. So it does kind of have that effect, I think, which can be a little strange at first, but then you get used to it.
Yes, yeah. So, but we were completely bowled over when we started thinking about, like, how to communicate the idea of an exhibition through an image. What is an exhibition in a marketing hoarding? It's just a picture with so many paintings put up. How do you communicate what the experience of an exhibition through an image in a public space? So these are the kind of questions we've been asking from the scratch, like,
Right.
And building an answer for ourselves, for our context, for our audiences. So there was nothing ready-made, available, a go-to option as such. So it's been a huge, amazing learning exercise, and also failing. We've failed miserably every time. So whatever happens, with after a lot of hit and trials.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that it's also in so many ways been a unique experiment, I think, within the historical art ecology of South Asia, India definitely. And, as you said, I think in so many ways the mall itself mimics the conditions that brought about the mall mimic the conditions that brought about the museum. So in so many ways, they are a kind of they're sort of cousins, and it actually is quite appropriate that the museum is in the mall and complicates its own relationship with that space or comments on it or is a kind of counterpoint to it, all the while also sharing this affinity. But I'm actually really curious. The museum has three spaces, right? So there's the mall in Saket, which is a South Delhi neighborhood. And there's a space at the Shiv Nadar Foundation in Noida, which is Uttar Pradesh, and the converted industrial building in Okla, I think, right, where the moving image works and kinetic installations are screened or mounted. What's the difference in programming among the three?
The Saket Museum is in a mall, which is a very important context for us. It's a museum in a mall, a site which we celebrate. Not everyone was initially very excited when we opened in a mall. Everybody thought, what is this? It's a heavy dose museum, but opening in such a frivolous space, how do the two things come together? But I think we have answered or clarified those positions and also engaged in a very exciting way with the history of that mall and that space before the mall came up also, because it is one of the largest malls networks within the country also, which gets like record footfalls. Mall gets the footfalls, museum doesn't. Alas, yeah. But by that, from that vantage point, we've gained a lot of insights. In that Inhabiting the Museum performance series, there was a performance that I commissioned by Nikhil Chopra, which was called Blackening 5, and where he made that research of this ecology. And he had done a performance many years ago as part of Khoj Live Festival at Khoj, which is across the road. And now at the museum, he was performing at the museum and inside one of those mall shops, uninhabited mall shops. So because we are also in a mall which is still vacant and is fully occupied, so that we have these lot of shops available to us, as spaces where we hold our children's workshop, etc. Kind of make do because we don't have enough space, simply because of so we make do with whatever we have. So he did a 36-hour performance reflecting on that rural and kind of uninhabited wilderness of that space and the stories around it, as remembered by the residents of Khirki and Hausrani area. So we've engaged with our locations in very specific ways also, and we are interested in those conversations. So like in Noida, the programming is essentially, from the perspective of the HCL families, HCL employees and their families, because it also already has an inbuilt audience of 20,000 plus employees who work in that space and are the major visitors. So we do keep that in mind, and so we usually have collection-based exhibitions in that space, but also a lot of experimental exhibitions we've done in Noida space, and also many young artist exhibitions also, as well as so it's not really a hardcore division as such. And the third space that you were talking about, the KNMA cellar, that's actually our storage space. We only did one exhibition there, which was Amar Kanwar's Such a Morning, which was a video installation exhibition. But that was one-off event there. But that's actually our storage and office space, because the collection was also growing, so the storage needed to be rebuilt. So we built it from scratch, and we thought about running that also as an art center, but that didn't really work out. We couldn't continue. So at the moment there are only two branches, Noida and Saket. Yeah, so Saket, in Saket, there's been you're well aware of the kind of exhibitions and programs.
I think what's interesting, just to kind of come back to even Nikhil Chopra's performance, his sort of commentary on the memory of the area, in so many ways, it's a very traditional discharging of the role of the museum as a keeper of memories, as a sort of mnemonic. And actually, I have a great story about this relationship between the neighborhood and the KNMA, because I remember that you in 2017, I think you had this residency for this hip hop group of kids who live in Malviya Nagar in Khidki. They call themselves the Khidki 17, and I had the pleasure of interviewing them sometime after that because I really enjoyed their hip hop intervention within the museum space. And I know that they did these rap walkthroughs where they rapped about the modernist artists that the museum hosts. One kid talked to me about how when he was growing up, I think his mother worked near the mall. And obviously, these are working class kids. He was very aware of the fact that his mother wasn't allowed to enter the mall. She was turned away many times. I think she cleaned houses or something like that. And because of the markers and signifiers of poverty, she wasn't allowed inside the museum. And that really stayed with him. And then as a teenager, when he got the chance to perform at the KNMA, he felt so empowered because the museum afforded that. And it's kind of ironic because it's within the same kind of complex. So anyway, yeah, I mean, just a kind of, I remembered this anecdote, so I thought I'd share it with you. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's, there are many enthusiasms that animate the museum, and some of them you've obviously talked about. I also want to kind of come back to some of the major highlights of programming at the KNMA over the past 10 years. Obviously, we can't cover everything, but I do want to talk about the retrospectives because I think that those are the shows that people most associate with the KNMA. All of them have been curated by Rubina Karude. I'm going to just run through the list for the sake of time and context. Nasreen Mohammadi, Nalini Malani, Himmat Shah, Jairam Patel, Rameshwar Bruta, Divan Sundaram, and Arpita Singh. I think sound like I'm announcing lottery winning numbers. But yeah, so all of these people, all of these artists have had retrospectives at the KNMA. I think I want to know, I'm most curious to know what are some of the challenges of sourcing not only the artworks, but also private documents like Nasreen Mohammadi's letters or personal artifacts like her desk, or works that haven't been displayed in decades or ever, like Himmat Shah's silver paintings or Vivan Sundaram's pop art paintings. Is there a particularly memorable moment from any of these retrospectives that really stands out for you in terms of acquiring the work?
Yes. Thank you for that anecdote also. That was a really touching one. And these retrospectives have been absolutely a delight to work on and assist Rubina on these amazing large scale exhibitions where the sheer number of works that we have sourced and loaned has been nightmarish almost. The challenges, apart from sourcing, has also been to look at. So one anecdote that's coming to my mind immediately is with Arpita Singh's exhibition. We had loaned around 25 works which were coming from abroad. And because of the customs problem, I mean, we had laid out the exhibition, and Rubina knew where these works are going, but still, because of some issues, the works could only arrive before the night of opening of the exhibition. So, which was
Wow.
a huge, and these huge 25 works coming from
I think it's really
Japan and from US. And very important works. So we left the place for them, and she mounted the exhibition the whole night. We waited, so there's been so many sleepless nights that all of us have spent at the museum, and just out of sheer love and passion. So sometimes these sort of challenges also shape the exhibition a bit differently. And of course, I think Rubina's experience in that comes very handy in able to envision and also manage with these limitations, without the works and with these limitations. It's a huge it was like right at the edge. So work keeps happening at the right till the edge, the challenges, apart from sourcing, has also been to look at how to present the very idea of retrospective, not just as a looking back at an oeuvre and at a life of these really important artists whose work has not been institutionally looked at. By now these artists, all the like Nalini Malani, Vivan Sundaram, Arpita Singh, they should have had these large retrospectives already. But I'm glad KNMA got a chance to work on them and comprehensively present their roofs. But alongside making these large formulations and making these work accessible, the question that we've been asking ourselves is more about presentation of these narratives and the larger art history. So how do we activate those ancillary questions alongside? So, for instance, immediately what's coming to my mind is when you said Vivan Sundaram was retrospective, it was huge. And we brought in works from London, and there are so many unseen works. And he's one artist who has exhibited a lot and has been written about a lot, and rightly so, and has been exposed and written about like in every which way possible. But still, to see his experiments in different mediums all together presented an absolutely different picture of his interventions into the art scene in a really remarkable contribution that he has made. So one incident that's coming to my mind is like, you remember these engine oil charcoal drawings that he had done in the 90s. And we sourced them from very different patrons and collectors, and they were being exhibited together also, and they were being exhibited per se after 30 years. So when the work started arriving, and we started matching them with the high-res images that Vivan had made accessible and available to us, we noticed that the works had changed because he had used engine oil. And he'd used and mixed it with charcoal, so its effect on paper had changed the work quite dramatically. Also, so these absolutely brilliant, beautiful drawings and experiments looked. Some of them had changed and looked quite different. So of course we got them all photographed and looked by some conservators, but just exhibiting them. I mean, it was a discovery even for Vivan, So each time we are mounting these retrospectives, and each time we're bringing these bodies of work together and into the public domain, there's this huge exercise of reframing, conserving, relooking that is happening, which gives a different kind of a sets of information. And similarly, with Nasreen Mohammadi's works, there are huge stakes involved, and coordination with different galleries, as well as lenders, as well as organizations and estates of the artists who are helping us, because obviously it's not possible to do this all by ourselves. And our museum team, my colleagues, have been have to work day and night figuring all of this out, and it's a huge logistical exercise and coordination exercise involving many agencies and agents involved in it. So sourcing Nasreen Mohammadi's diaries was extremely difficult. But now, once something like that has happened, once these works have been made accessible, these archival records have been made accessible. Like, for instance, like in one of our shows, we exhibited the original letters written by Raza to other progressive artist groups.
Yeah, I remember that. Have you forgotten me? This incredibly touching.
Incredibly touching, beautiful conversations happening between these 6 remarkable artists, even when the group has disbanded. The artist group is disbanded, but they're continuing the dialogue, continuing very passionately writing to each other, tell something else about the art. So the point that I was trying to make was that once these documents and these records have been made available, it opens up another sort of a possibility for other researchers and for other organizations to access those same works again. And such kind of requests come to us in tons post exhibitions, and we are very glad that through that other researchers are also able to take and carry forward that work. And other international exhibitions, so things that we have exhibited then have had a different life of their own through other exhibition making or in life of other displays and formats and discussions.
Right. I mean, some of this sounds quite anxiety-inducing, but I suppose that's professional hazard. Yeah. No, but I have a slightly more abstract question now, segueing elegantly from the conversation about retrospectives. Many of the retrospectives or attention to artists with long-spanning practices like K.G. Subramanian and Hakusha, there does seem to be an institutional interest in modernism as a site of possibility and art historical value. Why do you think that is?
Both Hakusha and K.G. Subramaniam are two absolutely amazing figures who have been given attention, but not that much as well, also, institutionally speaking. I'm quite interested and intrigued at the fact that you bring these two examples, because we organized both these exhibitions after the passing away of the artist. Right, yeah, KG Subramaniam was organized right after it was a homage. Yeah, right after he passed away, it was an homage to him. We exhibited his early works, and we had just acquired more than 50 drawings of his early phase of drawings, which were mostly done in the 50s and 60s, and which completely showed a very different aspect of KG Subramaniam's work.
Yeah. I remember those children's illustrations, those covers.
Yeah.
I've never seen those. I think they're quite rarely displayed.
So those phases were so akin to the language that other artists were developing in Shantiniketan, to Binod Bihari Mukherjee, and to Ram Kinkar Beds. So all those lineages were very visible. Those in those drawings in his days at the Weaver Service Center. And in Hakusha's exhibition was again an homage exhibition, which we did in his memory, and also thinking about his relationship with Gandhi. So these have been occasions to relook at modernism, but also at these figures who were at the center of modernism and modernity, and the conversation around setting up of national institutions. So they were not just artist figures; they were involved in so many other aspects, like Hakusha's own practice as an ethnographer, as also as a writer and documentation and archivist of rural arts, has been so important, and also as a curator. So this was also to recognize them and their contributions to these forms. So when we revisit them, so we're revisiting modernism with all these pluralities also, and asking newer questions. So likewise with KG Subramaniam's exhibition, also to kind of attribute that storyteller aspect of him, and as an educator, his contribution to education and to the pedagogy, the kind of so we were able to bring out a lot of archival material from Asia Art Archive, who documented and houses digital archives of his collection and documents.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is also that these constellations within the museum, they kind of illuminate so much about the contemporary as well. And so you never really escape this question of modernism. And maybe that's a more fraught conversation about the relationship or the continuum between the modern and the contemporary as conditions. I mean, I'm also thinking about the documents from the Vision Exchange workshop that Akbar Padamsi had organized in the late 1960s. And they were part of the KNMA Stretched Terrains exhibition. I mean, I thought that was really fascinating and obscure link in the genealogy, right, of contemporary art, and also this kind of what Nancy Adejania called the prehistory of new media. And it's only now that you sort of really know or are able to put it in any kind of context. So I think that there is a kind of excavation that's at play. And definitely, I think the KNMA does that. I mean, even with the progressives, I think that's what my next, point of conversation with you would be. The progressive artist groups, the group, sorry, and I'm quoting you guys, have formed a central axis of the curatorial narrative at the KNMA. And of course, Raza and Souza and Hussain have gotten their own exhibitions, similar to the retrospectives. And, we were just talking about this, that there are letters and photographs that allow you to glimpse these deeply intimate relationships and these that these artists shared. So again, there's this sense of excavating the modern, going back to something that, is already so storied in a way. So do you want to talk about that a bit? And is there a kind of fear also of exhausting that?
No, not really. Fear of exhausting that. I would like to maybe think about that a bit more. I don't think it's there's a lot happening which is yet to be excavated. But what's been exciting for us, that each time we've made these excavations, or each time we have put these documents out, it's been through a new lens and a new approach, which illuminates and gives a methodology of approaching the present, and has a bearing on contemporary art and culture. Has a bearing like this example that you made of Visions Exchange document. It's been a process. Like, we could arrive at that exhibition only after having done Nasreen Mohammadi's exhibition retrospective and Nalini Mullani's retrospective. And because of these retrospectives, Nalini also ended up discovering and rediscovering her own three early films that she had made as part of that vision exchange workshop, and re-exhibiting them now after like span of 50 years or so, her going back and materially excavating them, so making those possibilities available and those prompts available. So so it's not the process that we're doing in isolation. It's happening with the artists, it's happening in real time, it's happening with with different collectors or patrons of art who acquired a work of by a friend artist many years ago, just like that, but now it's being reseen as an important work of art, or by a researcher, where this so the permutation and combinations is endless. And but what's important here is the lens. So like in that exhibition, what that did was it made Nasreen and Nalini's intervention through the new media in this modern, in this scape of modernism dominated by these male artists, more visible and more accentuated. And so they were both experimenting with black and white photography. They were coming out with amazing results. They were making these huge leaps in their work in comparison to what these other male modernist artists were doing. And that sort of a meta history and writing of that meta history and exposing and helping unearth that has been quite fascinating. And for us to see that exhibition from that lens of the entire spectrum of 7 exhibitions, which were under Stretch Terrain's title, was very important. I mean, because all of this is coming also from these other institutional histories like Baudaji, no, not Baudaji, sorry.
Bhulabhai Desai Institute.
Bhulabhai Desai Institute, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do sound strangely similar.
Yeah.
It's quite easy to get to. Yeah.
So so and all these guys meeting there, and Nalini also meeting them there for the first time, and from where the conversations start happening and taking shape, and it is these meeting grounds were very important. In Stretch Terrains, you were seeing you would see these. That was the largest exhibition of Hussein's works after his passing away in 2011.
Yeah.
So after that, it's a shame that nothing happened in between, in 6 years.
I just want to come to the KNMA's engagement with more contemporary works. I feel like you've had contemporary artists more as part of group shows than solos. Is that an accurate assessment?
We take group exhibition as a form very seriously, and approach it in sometimes thematic and sometimes non-thematic ways also. And there are reasons for it, because we're interested in individual works per se. Sometimes they become the instigator of ideas and thinking, and then how that relays on to other artists and practices also is important, rather than just focusing on one. But we have organized exhibitions by Sonia Khurana, Shakuntala Kulkarni, Surendra Nair, and a spectrum of contemporary.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen individual works by people like Bharti Kher, Talur, Atul Rodia, Nikhil Chopra, all of the people that we've talked about in our conversation. I think it's also worth interrogating what we mean, and we keep coming back to this, but what we mean by contemporary. Maybe one means younger. To kind of circle back, I think this seems to be a recurring kind of motif in this conversation about what the contemporary really is.
I'm very interested in this category of the young itself, not only as a age, but also as a conceptual category of of a certain kind of agility and anxiety and or alertness, that all of that comes with this idea of youthfulness as a place. Also, so the series that I've been curating at the museum, Young Artist of Our Times. So under that, there've been solo exhibitions by Anpu Varki, by two anthropologists called Smell Assembly and the title, and also this recent title. So I mean, we are slowly working towards building that sort of a space and methodological and curatorial structure to think about these inquiries that are happening in different generations also.
Yeah. I mean, and also this idea of the young artist itself is so much purchase in the art world, particularly, right? You have to be under a certain age to be called a young artist and be eligible for like every grant and fellowship. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, you're probably onto something with that whole, with thinking about youth as a conceptual category. But yeah, sorry.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Such a disease. But this thing about youth also made me think about old media and young media.
We did an exhibition called Delirium and Equilibrium, which was around these kinetic objects and videos and films. And it was a second part exhibition of around the same medium of video art and video installation. So the first part happened in Noida. It was under the title Enactments. And so we tried to mediatically look at it, but also there, finding several shifts in the process, like the way the documentary film has undergone so many changes, from Amar Kanwar's practice to Naeem Mohammed to many other artists who are in that sort of working in that sort of a spread and space and scope of multiple channels. But also, these are more famous artists, but there are many more practices who are working alongside, and where are those, and how are they getting exhibited, etc. And that's also bringing them forth also requires a lot of working. And we are invested intellectually and curatorially and resource-wise also in doing that work also, but bringing them in the solid frame.
Yeah, in a way appropriate to their density, perhaps. The museum as an exhibitionary space has a history which is rooted in colonial violence. Occupiers took treasures and objects from their original owners or makers without their consent and placed them in foreign locations. Within India and its art historical narrative of modernism, one of the categories that becomes particularly vexatious is that of the indigenous. And again, this has a complicated relationship to the contemporary. Once again, the KNMA mounted a solo show of the late Adivasi artist Jangat Singh Sham called A Conjurer's Archive. It was not curated by an Adivasi curator. In light of this complex relationship, fraught relationship, unpleasant relationship that Indian modernism has with indigenous art, Adivasi art, which replicates that which European modernism had with art of their colonies. How do you respond to the viewer's discomfort?
These are very relevant questions, but maybe we will take our time in answering that and addressing them, because we don't want to jump or hush, immediately into. So that's one of the reasons and attempts that we are making in diversifying and moving away from the said marker of modern and contemporary into making these special exhibitions, which do not fall into an immediately given category also. Dr. Jyotinder Jain has been writing and has written a lot, has had an amazing relationship with Jangat Singh Sham. So he was already working on an exhibition and on this exhibition for a while. And when we invited him to co-curate it at the museum, it was not, as you rightly said, it was not curated by an Adivasi artist. I don't think that I necessarily don't partake in that approach that it has to be mandatorily. I think it could be co-curated with an Adivasi artist, and where are those voices, and amplifying those voices that are bringing richness and complexity is very important, and must be the work done by institutions, and has to be the work. So I am completely in that favor, but not from the position not from that hardliner position that an Adivasi artist work needs to be curated only by an Adivasi artist. I don't know. Somehow I'm a bit.
I think it's more complex than that. I mean, I think it's like saying that a female artist's work can only be curated by a man or something like that. I mean, of course, those are very reductionist approaches. But I think the reason I ask this question is just for us to open up the conversation about how institutions are often complicit in particularly grand institutions like museums, which have historically had power, complicit in excluding or marginalizing and sort of replicating those processes of marginalization and exclusion within communities. I mean, this is the conversation that's happening around the world when we speak of racial justice and caste justice. And part of that is not so much that X person should curate X exhibition, but just in terms of representation at all levels. In the case of Jangat Singh Sham, of course, he was involved with upper caste Savarn artists and cultural workers who have written extensively about him, and Dr. Jain has curated this exhibition, following from that tradition as well. But it's a moment of reckoning.
Within that exhibition, so it's been under the category of the special exhibitions, where we are slowly moving out from our comfort zone and trying to figure out these other areas. So we don't find ourselves completely equipped with that sort of a vocabulary and richness, that the specializations that these exhibitions also require, and the research, and also reaching out to those specific individuals who have the voices, like you're mentioning, Adivasi scholars, or voices who might be important and should be brought out alongside. So this is one step towards that direction. Not to say that, of course, it lacks a lot of things, but it is towards that direction. It's not, I completely acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the museum is doing enough to platform Bahujan art workers?
I would rephrase that question to think about other forms of marginalizations also. Like, for instance, like if one was to ask, we have done more than equal number of retrospectives of women artists than male artists, etc. But that's still, I don't know. Somehow I find myself a bit uncomfortable in addressing it frontally. Is museum doing enough for Bahujan artists? No. It's not doing enough.
Yeah.
It's not doing enough. If one is to, but somehow that question and that answer, my answer also makes me a bit uncomfortable, and I wonder why. And I would like to question myself and critique myself also, but not with the guilt, that the kind of guilt and the pressure that this current time poses onto the institutions right now. It's a time to answer it, it's time to address it, and it's time to delve into it. But I would still like to, at least for my own curatorial frameworks, find an answer in that complexity that I was talking about. And at least I know, like in my curatorial practice, I'm trying to address that. Like right to laziness just also takes into these forms of public pedagogies available into account, into its framework, and as facilitate these conversations.
Yeah. These are, of course, complicated questions, and also, there's always a danger of reification by or a tokenism, by virtue of this approach. Because that also often becomes a part of institutional strategies, right? Which is being criticized. Like in the West, you'll have black curators curate black artists, and that's all they are really allowed to do, right? This kind of hardening around identity. These movements are really arguments for including marginalized people within positions of power rather than any one kind of symbolic office, but just to have that plurality of voices within historically elite institutions. This has to be a matter of principles, whether it's feminism or an anti caste ideology. not cosmetics.
And I just want to mention here that uh, it's not quite correct to compare the Western contemporary art museums or that sort of a model to or the questions that they're facing right now to with what we are, the positions that and situations we are in right now in South Asia or in India per se. And because what you're asking is also a question of accountability, and accountability is not built in a day. Like and it's a very serious question of accountability, and I think that deserves attention in itself. Like, how do you build accountability in the systems, in institutional systems, or systems, quasi institutions that call themselves and take on certain responsibilities suo moto, like on their own accord, in their own ways. So if we've had for example, if we've had private funding or into the arts consistently for like 50 years or so, or then certain kind of measures of accountability would have been built into it. Like, just at the moment, just that simple continuity itself is under question. We haven't had private institutions of art that have lasted more than a decade or so, or have had a longer history or consistent amount of work. And so like at the moment at the museum, I mean, I'm taking that example because we are talking about KNMA also. In our 10 years of our journey, so the continuity plus this building of an accountability to the audience and to this public that we imagine, because it's also an imaginary public. There was no public per se that existed before the museum existed. Also because there was no dialogue for us, like so this imaginary public and this new public that we're and this art fraternity that we think we are in dialogue with. It's a reciprocal relationship. And the kind of the mechanisms of accountability need to be built, and and that's a process. That's a process in which artists and creative practitioners also need to partake in, and they cannot just simply be asking. They cannot simply be ranting. It needs to be asked systematically. It needs to be asked systematically through questions, through open letters, through addressal, through discursively. That's how you build accountability into the systems. When you make systems accountable to you and you make them answer. And making them answer is a very systematic process. It's a form. Accountability is also a form, like what Me Too did, or Me Too movement did in the larger framework. It literally shook, and it did very essential work. But then how it is carried out further is important. And that onus remains on everyone. The onus is not just on the institution. It cannot be just deflected onto the institution.
I mean, it's actually, whether it's sexual harassment or caste-based harassment or lack of inclusivity across different axes of marginalization. These are systemic issues, and our institutions and culture sector obviously reflect how our society is configured, right? And it's really a labor rights issue, which gets transmuted under capitalism into questions of identity and into these piecemeal sides of aggression. Like sexual harassment isn't disconnected from the larger issue of labor rights, right? So, and our culture sector is incredibly dynastic and patronage based. And people talk about this in the context of the film industry a lot, nepotism, or they think the worst of that world, of the world of glamour. But really, it's a question of an unorganized sector without the systems in place and the unions in place, without respect for labor, without respect for workers. And the manifestation of that is things like people being harassed and sexually assaulted, or not being paid fair wages, or being exploited for their work. they're all, of course, related, interrelated. So I agree with you that it is a structural and systemic failure, and it obviously doesn't just have to do with institutions. But I think that a lot of anger is easily displaced onto institutions because they become the markers and the kind of symbols of any particular industry. In the art world's case, museums, galleries become sites that people are able to project their anger onto. Um, but while we're on the topic, I do want to ask, why was Subodh Gupta's line of control removed from the premises of the museum within 6 months, I think, after he was named in Me Too?
It was not exactly, it was not because of the Me Too allegations against him, the kind of, this, I think we've said this before, or I think Mrs. Nadar or Ravina has said this publicly also before. This work was installed in 2012, line of control. And in the foyer of the malls, Southcourt Mall, in which the museum is located right now in Saket, and so it was an agreement, obviously, because it is not our property or our place. It's such a huge work, and it was an agreement with and permission with the mall authorities. And when we had also installed the work, there was a considerable amount of engineering work that had gone into it in terms of just reinforcing the floor, and the parking lot, in order to take that 20-ton work. It's a huge engineering feat, so it took several months to install it, and it obviously would have taken several months to deinstall it. So our agreement with the mall was expiring, and and there are teams that had come from London, who we have been in conversation, who had installed the work at Tate Trinale many years ago in 2010 or 11. So it's the same team who was equipped with handling that work and knows the paths in which. So it was more of a logistical issue, because this was already planned at that time. It was coincidental that it happened at the same time. But having said that, museum has been very much in support of the Me Too movement, and we've been also been part of the meetings organized by Culture Workers Trust Association, which formed in the wake of this all of this, and a very important initiative looking at both sexual harassment in workspace and in defining the idea of workspace also, because it does become informal, and the question of anonymity, and also labor issues, and other associated work related and professional. I hope, and I'm sure this new organization that is coming into being is going to play a very important role for all of us. So these new, we need these new setups. These are the setups that can make institutions that are part of that accountability building.
Yeah, for sure. Just to kind of move to another aspect of the political, the KNMA has exhibited work that deals with historical trauma and societal crisis, political crisis. Vivan Sundaram's memorial, Rubana Hussein's fragments, Ammar Kanwar's lightning testimonies all come to mind. With the state becoming increasingly authoritarian, how does the private museum position itself in a museal complex that has historically been dominated by the state? I mean, we're a country of public museums, and this is new.
So, see, we recently, last year, collaborated with the Ministry of Culture and Government of India to bring and present India Pavilion in the Venice Biennale, which was in the second edition. So that's the closest that we have ever worked with the government. We haven't yet had that, except for loaning works to National Gallery of Modern Art and loaning works back from them. It's like that to and fro movement. We haven't really had that sort of a close. That sort of a conversation around art per se. So which was the the exhibit that pavilion was around the with 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi, and that was the theme given, which was in itself a little problematic in terms of.
Isn't it ironic, right? Because this regime hates Gandhi. I mean, he had a lot of flaws, but those are not the reasons for why the current government hates him. He's anathema to everything they stand for, and yet, at the Venice Pavilion, they push you to organize, around him.
Yes and no. See, it's also, we need to also look at it where the funding from the government is coming from. It's coming from the 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi fund or whatever has been created, and so far the pavilion in the Biennale has not existed. India Pavilion has not existed. So the kind of contribution that government made and pushed was through that angle. And I do not know about those kind of inner workings, but that tangent made the pavilion possible. We can have difference of opinion on that. And I question it myself. But what I'm trying to say here is and what we started talking about in the beginning also about this remorphing and reshaping and this sort of a volatility that form of the contemporary art museum has. So we have been operating on different levels. So here we could also associate with with the government and with this very limiting theme of not limiting but a hard-lined thing. It's not Gandhi as a thematic is not a limitation, because then you can explore it in very different forms. But when but when it has to be only about the figure of Gandhi, so we were able to operate on that level, collaborate with the government with this limitation, and bring the pavilion on. And we were at the same time also able to bring and slip in works that were critical, that were interesting, that were questioning what has been happening since post 2014 onwards also, and politically in India, and also bring in works that bring, like for example, Ashim Purkayast's stamp works, Atul Dodia's cabinet work, which was formed in the aftermath of Gujarat riots also, and bring in, and also at the same time bring in works. Yeah, and also bring in works from the NGMA collection, which largely again think about the pavilion as such. About pavilion, idea of pavilion as proposed by Gandhi and manifested by Nandlal Bose. Of the Haripura panels, and also restore those works. In the process, those works are have not been shown, seen. Bring in Hussain and that large work, which has been almost out of public sight and completely, needed restoration and needed so much more attention, etc., to be able to prepare for showcasing. So able to make those negotiations also, which were not easy. Getting those works out was not easy, and at the same time, we were sure that this sort of a curatorial framework function is well suited. Is going to work in Venice, but is not going to work the moment you bring it back to India. Because there were these conversations happening that bring the same exhibitions back to India, but we were very, show it again in India. But we were very clear that sort of it will not work, and the reason why it will not work is also because we are cognizant of the fact that you cannot see Gandhi alone anymore. You have to see him with Ambedkar, with Patel, with other figures, with lots of debates that have opened up and unfurled in the political and social sciences and other spectrums. We have to acknowledge and bring in those voices and build in and rework on it completely. So what I'm trying to point out here is as a museum, we've been able to operate in all these levels also, and yet retain that voice and an understanding that something can work here, something cannot work here. cannot work in another context, and say no to that also. But it's a lot of negotiations that take place, and which happen very slowly and softly, and in ways that are not one person.
There's been a huge furor in the US and Europe regarding the source of funding for museums. People on museum boards have been protested into resigning because of their ties to companies that violate human rights. Given the closeness between the ruling party and industrialists in India, how do you think a corporate funded museum reconciles itself with this necessity of art being a site of resistance? Is it possible? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think we do it by curating, and of course it's a site of resistance. And I think the kind of curatorial propositions in the last 10 years we've been able to bring out from the exhibition, Is It What You Think, to which was exactly talking about post-Babri Masjid demolition moment and the practices that evolved, activist-based practices that evolved in the 90s, to the kind of the exhibition that I've curated at the museum right now, called Right to Laziness, and our viewers can actually our listeners our listeners can go online on knma.in, on our website, and take a virtual tour of the exhibitions currently. And so that exhibition looks at this entire December moment at Shaheen Bagh protest, and as well as also other forms of resistances built in. Yeah, no, so we have, of course. I mean, if museum has to be that size, has to be that site, has to perform, and there's a lot more work that needs to happen. Like at the moment, we're what I was talking about, accountability and the longevity of the institution. I think that matters a lot. Of course, the kind of issues and problems that a privately funded contemporary art museum would face are completely different from the problems that a government funded or a publicly funded art institution would face, and they differ. But the resolution the resolution could only be from the perspective of longevity. So far it's been good. The point of conflict comes when there are certain hardlinings happen within. So far we haven't reached that stage, and I think I'm quite curious about this question of commitments and commitments to certain visions, and keeping and as I was saying earlier, when we started this conversation, that I see my role more as an instigator, in terms of not letting the museum settle down. How long can one retain this unsettling feeling? Because the moment anything begins to solidify, it will. The other beautiful fragilities that at least I know and I've witnessed and I'm part of, and I experience in my journey in this institution, may get lost. So how to retain onto those and keep questioning more ideas is very important. Yeah, and that's the approach, and that and I keep finding ways of doing that, and I do that through curatorial, through my exhibitions, through my programs, through different kind of support systems that I help build.
Speaking of unsettling feeling, in light of the COVID-19 crisis, I want to ask how the museum has been coping.
It's been very difficult. Almost an existential moment, because we are so much used to of this physical proximity to space, and the moment you take that away, it's a hole. You don't have the space. You don't have the space.
I had a question about deaccessioning. Just your comments on this. I don't know how relevant it is for South Asia, but we know that in Europe and the United States, in North America, this is a very important issue within the museum space. Because of the pandemic, museums are having to sell their works in order to make ends meet, pay salaries, just keep the machine running. Uh, do you think that that there's a similar problem in the subcontinent?
See, most of the museums are government run. So, state museums and national museums that we have are, I'm sure the smaller private museums and personal archives would suffer. But I think so far from this government funded institution, we haven't heard any such thing yet. So I don't think deaccessioning is that big an issue, but people losing jobs and institutions closing down, like these smaller institutions, that could be like, because the effect of the pandemic. I mean, we are still going through the phase, but the effect of the pandemic would be very long term and would be seen through the decade. This entire decade would be marked by that and by the economic repercussions of what you know. So yeah, I think it's going to affect the livelihoods. It's going to affect artists in a very even though the business of art or selling of art or seems to be going okay and fine, seems to be going on, but it's still questionable because I'm sure the ones who suffer are the ones who are younger, have never had access to and access to resources, are the ones who will now in future will lose that other chance also, or that hope as well. So it's very important for institutions now to rise up to that challenge also and build in systems that have not existed before. So because it has definitely exposed the hard the hard realities that we knew for a very long time but had not addressed very directly. So it but here, I mean, like for KNMA, we are very, very small. We are not that big an organization per se. It's a small set of people still managing it. So in terms of layoffs, I don't think we'll be affected per se.
That's good. That's great. I mean, it's also, as we were talking about earlier, it's an already incredibly precarious industry that we're in, and the pandemic has just made it worse. But maybe, in a perverse sort of way, this is going to be, we hope, going to catalyze, those changes and cause all of this to be addressed, as you said. You just on a final note, I mean, I know it was a kind of grim prophecy of yours that the next 10 years and the next decade is going to be marred by the coronavirus, which is true, which is accurate. But what hope or vision do you have for the KNMA on its 20th anniversary?
Okay. There are many visions. There are many visions and many hopes and many different timelines that one wants to project onto the onto the museum and hope they all materialize and facilitate and get facilitated. I think one of the definite ones is plurality of voices that we are able to present and bring forth. So far, like if last decade was more about was more of an internal monologue of thinking about ourselves and thinking about this museum form and where we can be now that we have established ourselves and figured out a way of working. The next decade is definitely going to be about and should be about bringing in more people and more infrastructural groundwork and laying out. So germination of newer facilitations to happen. And I think, and I use the word facilitation in a very open, positive, and expanded way also. Like, so, I mean, reaching out to not just in terms of arts, not just for the arts, because we will see lot of spaces for conversations also will shrink. So I think and I suspect that museums will have to, at least at KNMA, I think museums will have to rise up to the challenge of becoming that space that is disappearing otherwise. So it has to take on more on itself to,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of responsibility. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really educational, edifying listening to you, and to also hear about the KNMA's journey and its and the hopes that you have for the museum and some of the problems as well within the culture space. Thanks for being with us.
Likewise. Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you for tuning into Vartalap with the KNMA's Senior Curator, Akansha Rastogi. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and share the episode over social media. For more information and updates, you can follow us on Instagram at art.alap and on Twitter at @RTLAAP.